Hey friends, and welcome back to Silverhawk Farm. I don't know how things are going where you are, but here in northeastern Kansas, it's getting to be just the most lovely time. The leaves are starting to change to brown and red. The goats are eating them like potato chips. The chickens are molting and getting extra fluffy feathers ready for the winter. And everything just feels so cozy and crisp. So I decided I was in the mood for some really nice fall baking today. So grab a hot beverage. I've got some green tea here. Light a candle, grab your favorite sweater, and let's get some really cozy apple cider donuts going. I actually haven't made any baked donuts before just because I've never had the pan. But recently my son was asking for me to grab donuts from a grocery order. We already had plans for that breakfast and the donuts would be stale by the time we ate them. So I was like, what if we just grab a donut pan and this week I'll make you some donuts. So that's me making good on that promise, but also getting some really tasty treats in and using up our apple cider. This recipe is from Sally's Baking Edition. I'll be sure to link it below so that you can follow along. I'll also be making my own spice mix because I don't have the pre-made spice mix that they recommend. So I'll be sure to link the recipe for that down below as well. So looking at the reviews on this recipe, it sounded like the boiling down of the apple cider vinegar can take quite a while. So I'm gonna get that started right away before I prep anything else. I have this lovely apple cider from South Baldwin Farms, which is a lovely farm near me. You don't want to skip this step because boiling down the apple cider is actually going to give it a much more flavorful donut than if we were to just use the cider undiluted. So I'm measuring out 1.5 cups of apple cider. And then I'm gonna put it on the stove. It says to use low heat, but I'm gonna go ahead and use like a medium heat because I don't see any reason why that should be a problem. I'll let you know by the end of the video if that was a bad idea, but I'm pretty sure if I turn up the heat just a little bit, there'll be less time for it to reduce down. Once this is reduced down to about 1/2 cup of liquid, we're gonna pull it and let it cool, and then we'll add it to the donut mixture. So the recipe actually recommends an apple pie spice blend, and I didn't have that, and then I looked at the recipe for how to make it from scratch and I was missing some of the ingredients for that. And then I saw that she also has like a pumpkin spice recipe, and she mentions that apple spice and pumpkin spice can often be swapped out 1-to-1 in recipes. So we're gonna do that because I love pumpkin spice and I have the ingredients for it, so that's helpful. So we're gonna add 3 tablespoons of cinnamon. Just realized I was using the teaspoon and not the tablespoon, so we're switching over. And bearing in mind how much I got in already. Ah! And then 2 teaspoons of ground ginger. 1.5 teaspoons of ground nutmeg, which I'm going to be grating freshly because I love freshly grating my nutmeg, but I'm just gonna eyeball it. I am using a microplane grater to get this nutmeg chopped up. You don't want any grater that's like super large because you don't want any big chunks of nutmeg in your food. It can be a little bit spicy and overpowering. But you could totally use like the smallest grater that you have and just be a little bit gentle so you're getting the smaller shavings in there. 1 teaspoon of ground cloves. This smells so good, y'all, already. 1 teaspoon allspice. And a pinch of black pepper. I'm gonna use my grinder on the very finest setting because obviously you don't want like peppery stuff, but it does help to add some spice and some depth to the food. And we won't use all of this in our recipe today, so I'm just gonna store it with a lid on it until I make my next fall pumpkin spice recipe, which will not be too long. Just double checked the apple cider that's going on the stove and it looks like it's going really well. It's steaming really nicely and I just give it a little bit of a stir. I'll go back every few minutes and make sure that it's getting stirred so that it's not getting stuck on the bottom or any like solidified stuff on the bottom. If you've been here long, you know that I prefer to weigh my flour even if I'm measuring the rest of my ingredients. So I'm going to go ahead and weigh this flour. It's gonna be 250 grams, but if you're measuring in cups, it's just 2 cups. Then we're gonna grab a teaspoon of baking soda, carefully without dumping a bunch in there. 3/4 teaspoon baking powder. 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. And this is in addition to the mix that we use cinnamon in. It's gonna be cinnamony. 1 teaspoon of our apple pie spice that we just mixed up. 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and I am very pro salt, so I'm gonna put in like a heaping 1/4 teaspoon. This is gonna be controversial, I bake almost exclusively with salted butter. And I know that it throws off the level of salt in a recipe, but I think most recipes don't have enough salt, and I help that by using salted butter, and salted butter is delicious and it hits different, so that's a thing. That's what I do. So we're gonna whisk all of this up, and then we'll mix all of our wet ingredients separately before combining them. It's so satisfying to whisk cinnamon into flour and like watch it go from like swirls to just beautiful perfection. It's gonna have us melt 2 tablespoons of butter, so I'm gonna cut that up and just melt it in the microwave. You could also melt it over a stove if you're not a microwave person. So I've just got a large measuring cup that I'm going to mix all of my liquids in because that seems easier for me. So we've got 1 egg. This is of course from my chickens. It's a Moran's egg, which they lay like really beautiful dark chocolate brown. I feel like they don't capture as well on film or photo as they do in person. You just have to see them. They're so beautiful. And it's also just a beautiful bird. I'm such a fan of my Moran's birds. And they have some of the prettiest roosters of all of the roosters. I will die on this hill. And then we are adding 1/2 cup of milk that has been sitting out for a bit. It said to have it at room temperature. I don't know if it's exactly room temperature, but it's close. We're adding our 2 tablespoons of melted butter. And then sugar, which in baking, a lot of the time sugar is actually considered a wet ingredient, and you want to mix it in with the wets instead of with the dries. So I'm going to be adding 1/2 cup of brown sugar and 1/2 cup of white sugar. My brown sugar is a little bit old, so I'm gonna have to do some breaking up of clumps, and that's fine. Close enough. And the recipe does specify that you can use dark or light brown sugar. I have light brown sugar because it's what I have. And then it says to use 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. My vanilla extract is still extracting the vanilla. I'd say it's about halfway to being complete. But for right now, I'm going to use a vanilla paste, which you can get at most stores and has a really nice rich flavor. You can use it interchangeably with vanilla extract in any recipe without having to adjust it, which is handy. We're gonna be adding the apple cider that has been reduced down once it is finished. I'd say it's probably about halfway there at this point. I'm keeping an eye on it. I'm just gonna whisk this really, really well to get it nice and consistent. And then I'll give it another whisk once I add the cider. Perfect, well let's get moved over to the stove and see how that's progressing. All right, so we've got our lovely concentrated apple cider. It boiled, I'm not sure for how long it was. I would say it was probably around 30 minutes. So I've given this at least 10 minutes to cool so it's not boiling hot when I'm putting it in with everything. And I preheated my oven to 350 degrees. And we're just gonna add this to the wet and get it nice and incorporated before adding it to the dry ingredients. Making sure to scrape off any of these bits on the edge. And then I'm going to use a spatula to get this mixed in because I feel like it just makes for the cleanest thing, you know? Like it's easy to scrape dough off the sides of things. You don't need to dirty extra tools. And you can use it to get everything out. I meant to mention earlier, but you could totally use this as a non-donut recipe. In the comments of this recipe, I noticed someone said that they followed it exactly and just used muffin tins. I also think you could probably do like a loaf of it. You would just want to adjust your baking time and depending on the size of what you're making. Is this a batter will be lumpy situation? It doesn't say that it's supposed to be lumpy, so I'm breaking out the whisk. And then I'm gonna get it kind of a hefty whisking in hopes that it's gonna break up these chunks. I don't think slight lumps is gonna be a big deal, but I don't think it's got the consistency that the recipe is describing. Okay, yeah, there it goes. Wow, this smells so good already. I can't imagine what it's gonna smell like when it comes out of the oven. So now we're not really seeing lumps so much as just this really lovely thickness. So I think that's what we're looking for. And I'm just giving it a little bit of an extra stir to make sure I'm not missing any dry bits. Oh, that's satisfying. I am super satisfied with the consistency of this mix. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this oil sprayer to spray my pan. If you use like a store-bought oil spray, that works. If you want to use butter, you could do that. If you want this thing to break off while you're recording a YouTube video, that's also an option. The recipe says that you can either spoon it in, but they actually recommend that you use like a large plastic Ziploc bag and then cut a hole in the edge of it to make like a nicer piping. I don't feel like doing that, so I'm not gonna, but you should do it because it'll be pretty if you want to, or don't. I'm not here to judge. So I'm just going to spoon this in. Like I said, I haven't made a ton of these, so like you're learning with me and it's fine. Okay, I feel like that's all right. We don't need plastic bags. I suppose I am gonna drip this everywhere. That's the kicker. That's fine. It says that the donut tin should be about half full, and I feel like I'm approaching that. And I am kind of making a mess of it. I'll go through with a paper towel before I put it in the oven so we don't get like crispy bits on the pan. So I've got my donut pans all ready to go and filled. I'm still gonna need to wipe them off, but I have a little bit of extra batter and I decided to go ahead and test whether this works well as a muffin. So I've got my lovely cast iron muffin tin. I love it so much. I got it from Lodge, and if you want to know more about cast iron, I made a really great video about it and I'll be sure to link it below if you want to get angry at me for washing my cast iron with soap. It's a great time. So I do have this very well greased. I'm hoping that it won't stick. And then I'm gonna do the same. I'm gonna fill this about half full. A little bit more than half full apparently. Note to self, use a lighter bowl next time. Glass is pretty but heavy. Okay, yeah, never mind. We're gonna have 2 giant muffins instead of 2 reasonably sized muffin. But look, I enjoy a giant muffin. I'm not mad about it. And I don't like waste, and I don't want like 2 normal sized muffins and a tiny muffin, right? I am just gonna use a paper towel to clean up this excess gunk on the pan, because otherwise it'll get kind of burnt. All right, so this is ready to go in the oven. I have it preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 177 degrees Celsius. I don't know that, it just says that on the recipe. And I'm gonna bake the donuts for 10 to 11 minutes, and then I'm gonna check the muffins at that point, but I imagine the muffins are probably gonna need another 5 minutes or so. So while that is baking, I'm gonna go ahead and get the topping all mixed up. So I'm gonna add a cup of granulated sugar, regular sugar, whatever your normal sugar is, 3/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon, 3/4 of the pie spice that we mixed up earlier. And then we've got my tiny whisk, and I'm gonna just whisk this all up. It's gonna be a really lovely topping, and it's gonna add some wonderful texture to the outside of the donuts. My whole life smells like cinnamon right now. Now that this is a nice smooth consistency, I'm just gonna wait for the donuts to bake before we get them dipped in this gloriousness. All right, so these are out of the oven and they look absolutely lovely, and so do the muffins, but the muffins are still cooling a little bit. So I am just going to very gently, so I don't scratch my pan, try and get these out of here. They've been cooling for a few minutes, so it's not super duper hot. Let's try this tiny little spatula. Let's see if that works. And be a little bit more forceful without worrying about hurting the pan. All right, this guy came out. Oh, that's beautiful. It's like a beautiful craggly donut. Just slightly warm to the touch. And I'm going to make this the top. Just gonna rub this in the butter and then directly into this. And that's it topped. Isn't that gorgeous? Oh my goodness. And then we repeat. All right, they are all done. The muffins turned out so well. So if you don't have a donut pan, don't let that deter you from making this recipe. So I feel like the muffins baked maybe 5 or 10 minutes more than the donuts. Just keep an eye on it and make sure it's not burning. But I am so excited to try this. So we've got like a really lovely cakey texture on the inside. It's got the crunch on the top. It's a really satisfying eating experience. The crunchiness of the larger sugar is helping. If you happen to have a sugar that's a little bit more coarse, I'd recommend using that. This tastes like fall in a donut. It's incredible. And since my son was the inspiration for making this video, why don't I grab him and we'll see what he thinks. If anyone hasn't seen him before, this is Desmond, my oldest. He is 9 years old. He'll be 10 in just a few months. And it was his idea to get donuts this week, so I figured we could see what he thinks about them. Which one looks good?
That one.
That one? All right, go for it. Good?
Really cinnamony.
Really cinnamony, that's true. We did use a lot of cinnamon. Do you like it?
Yeah.
How is it like out of 10? What's your rating?
7.
7 out of 10? All right, I'll take it. Awesome. Do you want to take that to your room? Do you want a plate?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There you go, bud.
I have a very small plate.
Love you.
Love you.
All right, I'm gonna go devour the rest of these donuts. I'm very excited to have a few left over when we wake up in the morning. If you wanna see more of my cooking videos, I actually have a playlist of all of the cooking videos that I've made so far, so I'll be sure to include that at the end of this video, and be sure to check those out because we've had a lot of really fun cooking times. So I hope that, like me, you are soaking up all of the fall vibes and all of the coziness over the next month or so. And I will see you all really, really soon. And in the meantime, treat yourself to something delicious. Ah! Drop the nutmeg in the thing, blow it off, pretend you didn't.